In the previous part, Elena, stuck in a hollow marriage to ruthless CEO Damien Blackwood, felt an undeniable pull toward his rival, Sloane Archer. After proving Damien's infidelity, she joined Sloane to oust him in a brutal boardroom coup, then set the internet ablaze with a staged power couple reveal. Strategy turned into something real, ending at the gala, where Sloane quietly confessed she may already be in love. For part 1, link is in the description. Sloane Archer shifted a pace back, the professional mask sliding neatly into place. But her eyes remained on Elena's, blazing with a silent, mutual recognition of what had passed between them. The line wasn't merely crossed, it was erased, and neither of them had the faintest idea what to do beyond it. The weight of Sloane Archer's words, "maybe I already have," hung between them for days. A constant electric thrum under every message, every public appearance, every stolen look. It became the unspoken third in the room, a truth too immense to confront directly yet too powerful to deny. They moved around it with sharpened awareness, each touch less performance and more inquiry. The catalyst arrived days later at a far smaller gathering, the opening of a new gallery, backed by Archer Innovations. The work was bold, abstract, and visceral, a riot of color and feeling that echoed the disorder in Elena's own chest. They played their roles flawlessly all night, the dazzling new pair. But the strain of pretense thinned, replaced by a raw, aching need for something true. Afterward, rather than parting ways, they drifted into the quiet, minimal comfort of Sloane Archer's living room, a vintage Dom Perignon breathing between them on the low sofa. The city lights blinked beyond the floor-to-ceiling glass, a distant galaxy of ordinary lives. With the public gaze gone, the masks began to slip. They sat angled toward each other, knees almost touching, glasses sweating in their hands. The room hummed with the refrigerator's distant motor and the dim tick of a designer clock. Elena set her flute down, fingertips trembling. Sloane did the same, waiting. No script, no witnesses, only breath and intent. The hush stretched, then narrowed to a point where truth could not be delayed any longer between them. The champagne, crisp and potent, loosened the careful locks they kept on their words. They weren't talking about stock prices or media spins. They were talking about childhood dreams, about secret fears, about the quiet loneliness of being the smartest person in a room full of sycophants. Sloane was laughing, her head thrown back against the sofa cushion, at a story Elena was telling about a disastrous piano recital at age 7. She looked younger like this, unburdened, the sharp edges of her CEO persona softened by the alcohol and the easy companionship. "I can't picture you being bad at anything," Sloane Archer said, her voice warm and slightly slurred with affection and champagne. Her eyes bright and focused traced the lines of Elena's face. "You have this terrifying competence. It's one of the sexiest things about you." The word sexy landed between them, bold and undeniable. The playful mood shifted, deepening into something more intense, more intimate. The air grew thick and heavy. Elena looked down at the bubbles rising in her glass, her own inhibitions dissolved by the alcohol and the sheer magnetic force of the woman beside her. The carefully constructed walls she'd spent a lifetime building felt like sand. "You know," she began, her voice quieter, losing its performative edge and becoming raw. "All my life I felt out of phase, like I was tuned to a frequency no one else could hear." She risked a glance at Sloane. "I learned to mimic the right signals to play the part one was given. With Damien, it was easy. It was just a transaction." She took a shaky breath, the confession feeling more terrifying and more liberating than any corporate takeover. "But with you, from the very first time you teased me about that terrible champagne, it was different. It was like finding a familiar signal in all the static. Like my soul recognized the tune yours was playing." She forced a weak, self-deprecating laugh, trying to brush it off as drunken poetry. "God, that sounds insane. Forget I said anything. The champagne is talking." "No." Sloane's voice was firm, clear. She set her glass down with a definitive click. She shifted on the sofa, turning her body fully toward Elena, her expression utterly serious, all traces of laughter gone. The CEO was gone. In her place was just Sloane, her eyes burning with a fierce, captivating intensity. "Don't you dare take it back. Don't you dare." She reached out, her fingers gently closing around Elena's wrist. Her touch was warm, sending a jolt straight through Elena's core. "I felt it too," Sloane Archer whispered, her thumbs stroking a slow, hypnotic rhythm over Elena's racing pulse. "That day in my office, when you laid out your brilliantly evil plan, I wasn't just looking at a scorned wife. I was looking at my mirror. I was looking at the missing piece of equation I'd been trying to solve my entire life." Her gaze was unwavering, cold and gelinecative. "You talk about feeling out of phase. I felt like a singular lonely note for decades, waiting for another note to create a chord. Waiting for you." Tears hot and unexpected pricked at Elena's eyes. No one had ever seen her so completely. No one had ever spoken to the core of her being like this. "It feels like we were." Elena's voice broke, the words of fragile, vulnerable admission. "It feels like we were supposed to find each other in another life." Or Sloane Archer didn't let her finish. She leaned in, her face mere inches from Elena's. The world narrowed to the space between them, to the heat of Sloane Archer's body, the intensity in her blue eyes, the scent of champagne on her breath. "Not another life." Sloane Archer breathed, her voice a low, fervent vow that vibrated in the charged air. Her free hand came up to cup Elena's cheek, her touch impossibly tender. "This one." And then she closed the final infinitesimal distance. The kiss was not tentative. It was not a question. It was an answer. It was a culmination. It was electric and all-consuming. A raw fusion of years of unspoken longing, shared vengeance, and a connection that felt as deep as bone marrow. Sloane Archer's lips were soft yet demanding, tasting of champagne and certainty. Elena melted into it, her hands coming up to clutch at Sloane Archer's shoulders, her fingers tangling in the silk of her hair, pulling her closer as if she might vanish. It was a kiss that rewired history. Every touch before this was a rehearsal. Every glance was a prelude. This was the main event. The world outside the windows, the city, the past, the future. It all dissolved into a meaningless blur. There was only the heat of Sloane Archer's mouth, the solid feel of her body, the soft sound of her breath catching, and the devastating soul deepness of it. When they finally broke apart, gasping for air, foreheads resting together, the silence in the room was different. It was no longer empty. It was full. It was theirs. They didn't speak. Words were useless, obsolete currencies. They simply looked at each other, their breath mingling, their eyes saying everything that needed to be said. The pact was forever changed. The revenge was now inextricably, beautifully tangled with something far more powerful, something that had been their destiny all along. The first night, the elevator ride to Sloane Archer's penthouse became a hushed, pressurized climb into another reality, a sealed, breathless rise right now. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. The air between them was heavy with the aftermath of the kiss, a seismic shift that had splintered the carefully arranged framework of their pact, and left only raw, shaking possibility. They stood apart, yet were linked by an unseen current so strong Elena could feel its tug deep in her stomach. Sloane Archer's gaze stayed fixed on the rising numbers, her profile a study in fierce control, as if she were gripping her own composure by a thread. Elena leaned against the opposite wall, her body thrumming, every nerve ending still singing from the press of Sloane Archer's mouth. The taste of her, the devastating sweetness of it. The doors slid open directly into Sloane Archer's private foyer. The space was just as Elena remembered from her late-night visit. Cool marble, soft recessed lighting, and the faint trace of Sloane Archer. Yet it felt altered tonight. It wasn't a corporate refuge or a strategist's war room. It was a crossing, so completely undeniable. Sloane turned toward her. The professional facade was gone, burned away by that kiss. In its place stood a naked, hungry softness that made Elena's breath catch. Her eyes, usually so sharp and appraising, were dark pools of want, almost painfully intense. "Are you sure?" Sloane Archer's voice was rough, stripped bare of its usual assured cadence. It was the last remnant of her offering Elena an out, a chance to step back from the edge they were both perched on. Elena didn't answer with words. She crossed the gap into strides, her hands rising to cradle Sloane's face, her thumbs brushing the high arcs of her cheekbones. She looked into those storm-blue eyes, seeing her own desire mirrored back, magnified and terrifying. "I have never been more certain of anything," she whispered, and then she kissed her again. This kiss was not like the first. It wasn't discovery. It was acclaiming. It was hungry and desperate, a release of all the pent-up wanting, the stolen looks, the electric touches that had gathered for months. Sloane Archer's arms wrapped around her, crushing her close, one hand weaving into the hair at the nape of Elena's neck, the other spread against the small of her back, pressing their bodies together until not a sliver of light could slide between them. They moved through the penthouse, a tangled, urgent tangle of mouths and hands and ragged breath, never breaking contact. A jacket slid off and dropped careless to the floor. A strap slipped from a shoulder, followed by the hot, open-mouthed press of lips against newly bared skin that made Elena gasp and arch into the touch. They reached the doorway of Sloane Archer's bedroom, a vast minimalist chamber dominated by a huge bed and the panoramic cityscape beyond. Sloane Archer paused, her forehead resting against Elena's, both of them breathing hard. "Elena," she breathed, her voice a ragged prayer. "I need to see you. All of you." Her fingers, usually so steady and exact, trembled as they found the hidden zipper of Elena's silver dress. The sound of it sliding down was thunderous in the quiet room. The fabric pulled at Elena's feet, a puddle of liquid moonlight, leaving her standing in nothing but her heels and her vulnerability. She should have felt exposed, but under Sloane Archer's burning, reverent gaze, she felt warped. Sloane Archer's eyes drank her in a slow searing journey from her eyes to her lips, down the column of her throat, over the swell of her breasts, the curve of her waist, the length of her legs. "My God," she whispered, her voice thick with awe. "You are so much more beautiful than I ever imagined, and I have imagined a lot." The admission, so raw and honest, shattered the last of Elena's inhibitions. Her own hands went to the buttons of Sloane Archer's pristine white shirt, fumbling in her urgency. "Your turn," she murmured, her voice husky. "I want to see the woman behind the CEO." Sloane Archer helped her, shrugging out of the shirt, her trousers following quickly. And then she was there, just as powerful and stunning in her nakedness as she was in a boardroom. Her body was lean and strong, all defined muscle and smooth skin. Elena's gaze traced the elegant lines of her hands following, learning the landscape of this woman who had become her entire universe. They fell onto the bed in a tangle of limbs, the cool sheets of shock against their feverish skin. The revenge pact didn't just feel distant. It felt like it had happened to different people in a different lifetime. This was something entirely new, something primal and profound. There was no more pretense, no performance. There was only feeling. Sloane Archer's mouth was everywhere, on Elena's lips, her neck, the sensitive skin behind her ear, trailing a blazing path down her sternum until she took a peaked nipple into her mouth, drawing a broken cry from Elena's throat. Elena's own hands explored the powerful planes of Sloane Archer's back, her nails scoring lightly down her spine, making Sloane Archer shudder and groan above her. It was tender, and it was rough. It was slow worship and desperate, frantic need. It was laughter muffled against skin as they fumbled with a clasp. And it was tears, happy, overwhelmed tears shed into the crook of a neck. It was as if they were trying to map every inch of each other to learn a language they'd always known. but were only now speaking aloud, to make up for every lifetime they had spent apart. Time lost all meaning. The city outside slept, but they were awake, alive, burning in their own private supernova. When Elena finally cried out Sloane Archer's name, arching off the bed, as a climax ripped through her, it was with a sense of coming home to a place she never knew existed. And when she returned the favor, watching the powerful, controlled Sloane Archer come utterly, beautifully undone under her touch, whispering her name like a sacred oath, Elena felt a possessiveness so fierce it stole her breath. Later, spent and slick with sweat, they lay tangled in the ruins of the sheets, limbs intertwined. The first faint light of dawn began to paint the skyline in hues of rose and gold. Sloane Archer lay on her back, Elena's head on her shoulder, her fingers tracing idle, possessive patterns on Elena's bare arm. She pressed a soft, lingering kiss to Elena's hair. "I meant it, you know," she whispered into the quiet, her voice with emotion and spent passion. "I have never in my entire life wanted anyone the way I want you. It's terrifying." Elena lifted her head to look at her. In the soft morning light, Sloane Archer looked younger. Her features relaxed, her eyes soft with a wonder that made Elena's heart ache. She leaned up and kissed her, a slow, deep promise of a kiss. "Don't be terrified," she murmured against her lips. "We're just getting started." And as they drifted into an exhausted, sated sleep wrapped around each other as if they'd never let go, the last embers of their revenge pact finally died out, having ignited a fire that would keep them warm for a lifetime. Part 9. Obsession and banter. Days bled into weeks, each one a sun-drenched, passion-soaked blur. The world outside their bubble, the business news, the socialite gossip, the fading specter of Damien ruin felt like a dull, silent movie playing in another room. Inside their world, every sense was heightened, every moment saturated with a vibrant, terrifying, glorious reality of them. Their fake dating was a forgotten fiction, a discarded script from a previous, duller lifetime. What existed now was an all-consuming entanglement, a fusion of two powerful entities that had found in each other their perfect explosive match. It manifested in a constant low-grade hum of physical awareness. During a tedious budget meeting, in Sloane Archer's office, Elena, sitting across the table as a newly installed consultant, would catch Sloane's eye. Sloane Archer's gaze would drop to Elena's lips as she absently traced the rim of her coffee cup, and a slow, secret smile would spread across her face, making the CFO stutter over his projections. Elena would simply raise an eyebrow, a silent, smoldering challenge that promised a reckoning later. The air in the room would grow thick and charged, the numbers on the spreadsheets forgotten by both of them. They were inseparable. Lunch was not a business meeting. It was a picnic on the floor of Sloane Archer's office, sharing sushi with their fingers. Evenings were not for networking. They were for tangled limbs on Sloane Archer's vast sofa, trading sections of the newspaper, and whispered critiques of articles about themselves. The obsession was a living thing. Sloane Archer, who had once prided herself on her monastic focus, found her mind constantly drifting to Elena, the scent of her perfume on his jacket, the specific way she laughed when truly surprised, the feel of her skin under his fingertips. She'd be in the middle of drafting a crucial email and would instead find herself typing a text. "I'm bored. Come distract me." Elena, who had spent a lifetime building walls of impeccable control, reveled in the glorious chaos of this surrender. She adored the possessive flash in Sloane Archer's eye whenever someone stared at her too long at an event. She loved how Sloane Archer's voice, usually so measured and commanding, could break into a ragged whisper against her throat in the dark. Their banter was a shared language, a playful rally that blended sweetness, obsession, and their natural rivalry. One afternoon, Elena was trying to read a contract on Sloane Archer's tablet, while Sloane nuzzled the sensitive, placed behind her ear, making focus impossible. "You're a menace," Elena murmured, her eyes fluttering shut as she tipped. her head to offer better access. An unscrupulous CEO who corrupts her own consultants. It's not corruption. Sloane mumbled against her skin, her hands sliding down to Elena's hips. It's a performance review, and you're exceeding every expectation. Another time, Sloane was on a tense video call with investors in Tokyo, her persona cool and professional. Elena, knowing the call was audio only, slipped into the chair opposite her desk. She slowly, deliberately crossed her legs, letting her shoe dangle from one toe. Sloane's eyes, locked on the screen, went dark. She listened to the investor for another minute, then cut in, her voice a fraction tighter than before. I appreciate the figures, Ryotasato. Let's circle back after we've run new projections. Something has come up that requires my immediate attention. She ended the call, then leveled a predatory look at Elena. You are going to be the death of my productivity. Elena grinned, truly unrepentant. You said you wanted a partner who could keep you on your toes. I believe I said on my toes, not incapacitate me with lust during a multi-million-dollar call. Sloane Archer retorted, already rounding the desk. The jokes were constant, a mirror of their new shared reality. I'm considering hiring a new CFO, Sloane announced one morning over breakfast, her tone grave. Elena looked up from her tablet. Oh, is Billionaire underperforming? No, she's perfectly adequate, Sloane Archer said, sipping her coffee. But I need to fire someone for gross negligence and constant distraction of the CEO. It seems only fair. Elena kicked her gently under the table. You can't fire me. I'm a package deal. You get the brilliant strategist, she said, gesturing at herself. And you have to tolerate the distracting muse. A punishing bargain, Sloane Archer said, though her eyes sparkled. But I suppose I'll keep you. The playful rivalry was always underpinned by a profound respect. They were two alphas who had found not a fight, but a dance. They challenged one another, debated each other's business strategies with intensity, and pushed each other to be sharper, bolder, better. Yet beneath the obsession and the banter, there ran a soft, steady current of wonder. Sometimes, in a quiet moment, Sloane would simply look at her, her expression easing from desire to something deeper, more reverent. What? Elena asked once, self-conscious beneath the gaze. I'm just memorizing you, Sloane said simply. All of you, the strategist, the muse, the woman who laughs at my terrible jokes. I spent so long building this empire, believing it was everything. Now I look at you and realize this is what I was building it for. For us. The obsession wasn't just physical. It was intellectual. It was emotional. It was a frightening, exhilarating sense of two jigsaw pieces from entirely different boxes snapping together, and realizing they'd been meant to form a single breathtaking picture all along. They weren't just in love. They were consumed by it, building a new world together from the ashes of the old. One whispered joke, one heated glance, one perfect united front at a time. Part 10. A better upgrade. The Met Gala was once again a sea of sculpted updos and diamond-cold smiles. The jungle was the same, but the predators had changed. Ella nested amidst the glittering throng, but the gilded cage was a distant memory. She was no longer an accessory. She was a center of gravity. On her arm was Sloane Archer, resplendent in a tuxedo of deep oegene that seemed to drink the light. The velvet lapels a subtle nod to regality. Where they had once entered hand in hand as a statement, they now moved as a single unified force. Sloane's hand rested on the small of Elena's back, a casual, possessive touch that spoke of intimacy, not performance. They didn't need to whisper conspiratorially for the cameras. Their connection was a visible aura, a quiet hum of shared power and private joy that made others orbit around them. They were the undisputed power couple of the moment, their story a modern myth, a tale of betrayal, brilliant revenge, and a love so potent it had toppled an empire. Journalists vied for a comment, socialites for a moment of their time. Butylin and Sloane existed in their own sphere. their attention reserved for each other. A ghost from the past flickered at the periphery. A bloated, sallow-faced man in a tuxedo that looked rented, trying and failing to command attention from a group of junior investors who were politely looking for an escape. Damien Blackwood. His presence was a whisper, a footnote. The scandal had eviscerated him. The divorce had bled him dry. The industry that once feared him now pitted him. The worst fate imaginable for a man like him. He was irrelevant, a relic. He caught Elena's eye for a split second, and in his she saw not anger, but a hollow, broken emptiness. She felt nothing, not triumph, not pity. It was like looking at a stranger. She turned back to Sloane, who was making a wry comment about the absurdity of the theme, and the world snapped back into vibrant, beautiful focus. Later, escaping to a quiet balcony for air, the city sprawling beneath them like a field of stars. Elena leaned into Sloane Archer's side. Sloane Archer's arm came around her automatically, pulling her close against the evening chill. He was here, Elena said softly, not as a warning, but as a simple observation, like noting the weather. Sloane didn't need to ask who. She simply nodded, her chin brushing against Elena's hair. I know. He looked small, Elena murmured. He always was, Sloane replied, her voice devoid of malice. It was just a fact. He just had a lot of noise around him to make him seem bigger. Elena looked up at her at the strong, clean line of her jaw outlined against the night sky. The woman who had seen her, truly seen her, from across a crowded room. The woman who had handed her a glass of whiskey and the means to her liberation. The woman who had looked at her wicked, brilliant plan and called it deliciously evil. The woman who had kissed her and rewritten her universe. The revenge had been sweet, the victory intoxicating. But this quiet, steadfast certainty, this was everything. He was the catalyst, Elena said, her voice full of wonder. But he was never the point. This was you were. She turned in Sloane Archer's arms to face her. You weren't just revenge, Sloane Archer. You were my destiny. I think I was just taking the long way around to find you. Sloane Archer's eyes, usually so sharp and analytical, were soft, reflecting the city lights like twin galaxies. She cupped Elena's face in her hands, her thumbs stroking her cheeks. And I was just building a kingdom, she whispered, waiting for my queen to come and claim her throne. They kissed then, not for the cameras, not as part of a pact, but as a seal on a promise. It was a kiss of belonging, of homecoming. Hours later, tangled in the impossibly soft sheets of Sloane Archer's bed, the penthouse dark and silent around them, their world was reduced to the space they shared. Limbs were intertwined. Elena's head rested on Sloane Archer's chest, rising and falling with her steady breath. The scent of their skin, their perfume, and their lovemaking hung in the air, a sacred incense. Sloane Archer's fingers traced idle, mesmerizing patterns on Elena's bare back. In another life, Sloane began, her voice a sleepy rumble in her chest, repeating Elena's old words back to her. Elena lifted her head, meeting her gaze in the moonlight. She smiled, a slow, radiant thing that reached her eyes. She placed a soft, lingering kiss over Sloane Archer's heart. No, she whispered, her voice filled with a conviction that settled deep into her bones. Not another life. This one. This is the one we were meant for. This is the one we get to live. And as Sloane Archer pulled her closer, wrapping herself around her, whispering promises into her skin, promises of mornings, of years, of a shared future they would build together. Elena knew it with every fiber of her being. They were no longer Elena and Sloane, the notorious tale. They were simply Elena and Sloane, soulmates. And their life, this messy, glorious, hard-won life, was the only one that mattered. It was the upgrade. It was the destination. It was home. Epilogue. The chapel was nothing like a traditional one. It was a glass-walled conservatory tucked in the gardens of the Archer estate. overflowing with white orchids and gardenias, their perfume blending with the humid air. Sunlight poured through the panes, stippling the guests, a curated circle of true friends, faithful board members, and a handful of astonished yet supportive relatives. There were no Thorn associates. That chapter was Ash. At the front, Sloane Archer stood, an image of sleek, commanding elegance in a tailored ivory suit. Her blonde hair swept back. She looked every inch the CEO, but her usual aura of unflappable calm had vanished. She was vibrating, her hands clasped tight before her, her gaze fixed unseeingly on the efficient. Every few seconds, her eyes would flick to the end of the flower-strewn aisle, a nervous, vulnerable smile touching her lips. The music changed, everyone rose, and there was Elena. She wore a gown of liquid silk, both classic and utterly modern, skimming her curves before falling into a soft train. Her dark hair was loose, spilling over her shoulders. She carried no bouquet. Her hands were free. She didn't need to hold anything. She was walking toward everything she would ever need to hold. Her eyes, bright and shimmering, never left Sloane Archer's. The world, the guests, the efficient, it all dissolved into a luminous blur. There was only Sloane Archer waiting for her, gazing at her as if she had hung every star in the sky just for this moment. The walk felt both endless and instantaneous. When she finally reached Sloane Archer, she took the offered hands. They were trembling. Or maybe Elena was. It was impossible to tell where one of them ended and the other began. The efficient, a warm-faced woman who had known Sloane Archer since business school, began to speak. She spoke of destiny, of partnership, of finding the one who sees the truest version of you. It was all finely crafted, yet neither woman heard a word. They were lost in each other, in the electric current passing between their joined hands. Sloane Archer, the efficient, said, her voice cutting through their private haze. "Would you like to share your vows?" Sloane Archer took a deep, shaky breath, her thumb stroking circles on Elena's knuckles. She opened her mouth, her eyes searching Elena's face as if memorizing at anew. "Elena," she began, her voice thick with emotion. You were the unexpected variable in every equation, the one I never saw coming." She swallowed. "I thought I had my life perfectly calculated. And then you walked into it with your brilliant mind and your wicked smile. And you dismantled me, and you put me back together into something infinitely better." Her eyes glistened. "You are my partner, my equal, my greatest adventure. My every victory is sweeter with you. My every quiet moment is a sanctuary because you're in it. I vow to." She stopped. The words were failing her. The intensity in Elena's gaze, the love shining back at her, was too much. It demanded a more immediate, more physical language. Instead of finishing her sentence, Sloane Archer let out a soft, breathless laugh, raised Elena's hands to her lips, and pressed a fervent, lingering kiss to them. A soft, collective "oh" rippled through the crowd. Elena's breath hitched, a tear finally escaping down her cheek. The efficient smiled. "I think we can guess the rest." Elena didn't even try to speak her prepared vows. They were ashes in her mouth compared to the fire Sloane Archer had just ignited in her soul. "You," Elena said, her voice a husky, emotional whisper that carried through the silent room. "You were the signal in my static, the answer to a question I was too afraid to ask." She stepped closer, erasing the last inch of polite distance between them. "You saw the monster in me, and you called it magnificent. You saw the broken pieces, and you didn't try to fix them. You just held them in me. You make me feel so fiercely. Sloane Archer, you make me feel." She couldn't finish. The words were inadequate. If Sloane Archer's response was to kiss her hands, her response was to close the gap. She leaned in, cuped Sloane Archer's face in her hands, and brought their lips together in a kiss that was not sweet, but profound. It was a vow in itself, a promise of passion, of hunger, of a love that was all-consuming and eternal. The guests erupted into laughter and cheers. The officiant threw her hands up in mock exasperation, beaming. Well, I was going to tell you that you may now kiss, but I see you've taken the initiative. They broke apart, laughing breathlessly, foreheads pressed together, their noses brushing. They were oblivious to the applause, to the tears of their friends, to everything but the shared breath between them. The rest of the ceremony was a formality they endured with impatient, giddy smiles. The rings were exchanged, their hands fumbling, not from nerves, but from the desperate need to touch, to connect. The pronouncement was met with another, much longer kiss, that the officiant had to gently clear her throat to end. The reception was a whirlwind. They were the perfect hosts, gliding between tables, laughing, dancing. But their attention was a fraying thread. During their first dance, Sloane Archer's lips were at Elena's ear, not whispering sweet nothings, but a running commentary of what she planned to do when they were finally, blessedly, alone. Do you know? Sloane murmured. Her hands played possessively on the small of Elena's back. How long I've been thinking about getting you out of that dress. Elena shivered, pressing closer. Since you saw me in it. Since I saw the sketch from the designer, Sloane corrected, her voice a low hum against Elena's skin. I've been having very inappropriate thoughts through every single toast. They cut the cake, feeding each other bites with a tenderness that quickly turned playful, then promising as Sloane Archer caught a stray bit of frosting from Elena's lip with her thumb, her eyes darkening. They were obsessed, addicted. The need for each other's touch was a physical ache, a therming undercurrent beneath the celebration. Every brush of fingers as they accepted a gift, every stolen glance across the table, every secret press of Sloane Archer's knee against Elena's under the table was a message, a countdown. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Sloane Archer stood, tapping her glass. The room fell silent. Thank you, she said, her voice warm but carrying a note of undeniable urgency, for celebrating with us, for being part of our story. But, if you'll excuse us, my wife and I have a very pressing engagement to get to. The room exploded in good-natured laughter, whistles, and cheers. Elena stood, her face flushed with happiness and anticipation, and Sloane led her through a tunnel of thrown petals and well wishes. Their car door hadn't even fully closed before they were on each other, the partition thankfully already up. It was a collision of lips, of hands, of desperate, happy laughter. Home, Sloane Archer growled against Elena's mouth, giving the driver the address through the intercom without breaking the kiss. Quickly, the penthouse was filled with moonlight and the lingering scent of flowers from the morning's preparations. They didn't make it to the bedroom. Sloane Archer pinned Elena against the front door the moment it closed, her hands already working at the intricate buttons of the wedding gown. I've been waiting all day to touch you. Sloane Archer breathed, her kisses moving from Elena's lips to her jaw to her throat. All day. You have no idea. I have some idea. Elena gasped, her fingers tangling in Sloane Archer's perfectly styled hair, ruining it. I've been right there with you. The dress pulled at her feet, a puddle of liquid silk. Sloane Archer swept her up into her arms, a gesture of breathtaking strength and possession, and carried her to the large rug before the fireplace. They didn't need a bed. They needed each other right then, right there. Their love-making was not the tender, slow exploration of their first night. It was a celebration, a reclaiming, a frantic, joyful reaffirmation of every unspoken vow they'd made that day. It was whispered promises against heated skin, the slide of wedding bands against sweat-slicked bodies, the overwhelming, breathtaking certainty of belonging. Later, tangled in a heap of limbs and discarded formal wear wrapped in each other's arms as the moon traced its path across the floor, Sloane Archer traced the line of Elena's hip, her touch reverent. My wife, she whispered as if trying out the most wonderful word in any language. Elena turned her head, nuzzling into Sloane Archer's neck. My wife, she echoed. The words a perfect seal on their perfect day. The wedding had been a public declaration. But this, the quiet, the touch, the overwhelming obsessive need that had them reaching for each other, even in the peaceful aftermath. This was the real vow. It was a promise that would last long after the last orchid wilted. A promise to always choose each other, to always crave each other, to always find home in the simple sacred act of a touch.